Let's talk about bucket shops. Bucket shops were common in the late 1800s and in early 1900s. They looked like stock brokerages, but they weren't connected to the stock market at all. They were found in pretty much every large American city from about the mid-1800s through the 1920s. You'd walk in, you'd see ticker prices on the wall, and you would place what looked like a stock trade, but no shares were ever bought. No ownership changed hands. You weren't investing in a company, you were betting on stock price movement. If the stock went up, you made money. If it didn't, you had to pay the shop and you would lose money. And the shop was always on the other side of this bet. That's why they were called bucket shops. Your money went straight into the house's bucket. It was gambling, but it felt like investing, and that's the important part. They ran these extreme margin schemes. They'd offer leverage as high as sometimes 100 to 1, and then they would charge interest on it. So they'd say something like, for $1, we'll let you trade on $100 worth of stock, but you had to pay interest on that imaginary $99. And since no real stock was ever being traded, the bucket shop took your dollar plus any interest you paid over the coming days or weeks, and they carried no risk themselves. So they never actually loaned money. They never owned stock. They just sold the illusion of leverage. Bucket shops didn't just encourage gambling, but they kind of helped normalize a way of thinking about markets at the time that had nothing to do with ownership, nothing to do with value or responsibility. And by the early 1900s, bucket shops were really everywhere. They really lowered the barrier to entry, and anyone with a few dollars could now play the market. And in doing that, they trained an entire generation to think of stocks as a gambling chip and not companies, as these short-term bets and not long-term commitments. Even after many bucket shops were shut down or outlawed, because they were essentially gambling at the end of the day, these gambling operations. The mindset still stuck though. And by the 1920s, that kind of speculation had moved into more legitimate looking spaces. It now had moved into brokerages, margin accounts, curb markets. People were still betting on price movement and borrowing money to do it. They were still detached from the underlying businesses. And the frenzy that led up to the Great Depression in 1929 was largely caused by that same learned speculation that happened in the bucket shops. It was leverage and speed. That was the idea. And a culture that had been trained to believe that prices going up was the point. When the market turned, there was no cushion, no long-term orientation, and the world panicked. Bucket shops weren't like the direct cause of the 1929 crash, but they absolutely helped shape the behavior that made that possible, and they helped turn markets from places of investment into places of speculation. Now, it makes me think in 2008, credit default swaps weren't illegal. They were just more sophisticated than bucket shops. They were sold as insurance against an asset risk, but functionally, a lot of them were side bets. On said asset risk insurance, you didn't have to own the mortgage, but you could bet on the risk of the mortgage. You could put a credit default swap on a credit default swap, and both of those are bets. And you could put that credit default swap over and over, and you'd have multiple chains of them, and it would just be stacking this risk on top of risk. Just like bucket shops, this created a system where people could profit or simply just place a bet, I guess, without being responsible for any sort of underlying asset. And when markets reward speculation like that, when they reward speculation more than market investment stewardship, and when profit is detached from real world consequences, I think that's when you don't get stability, you get fragility. And bucket shops disappeared because they made markets behave like casinos, because they were so related. And that's I think part of the problem, there was more math and more leverage later on, but people were just still betting on the stock market the same way that they bet on bucket shops, and that's what led to the Great Depression. That's what I think led to the 2008 financial market. And I don't know how to articulate it yet, but I think that's what's happening now. But it may not lead to anything.